There's a part of you that rarely sees the light. You don't talk about it. Not with your friends, not with your partner. Maybe you don't even admit it to yourself. You sidestep it with jokes. You distract yourself when it starts to surface. You convince yourself it's not a big deal. But it is. Late at night, when everything is still and there's nowhere to hide, it begins to whisper. And what does it say? It's not what you hear in love songs or see in carefully curated movie scenes. This isn't romance. It's not even just sex. It's something more primal, more raw. It's desire soaked in power, submission, fantasy, fear, shame. Carl Jung had a name for this, the sexual shadow. And he didn't say it was evil. He didn't suggest you should run from it or destroy it. What he said is much harder to accept. You must integrate it. Because if you don't, it doesn't go away, it waits. And eventually, it comes back, not as a gentle reminder, but as obsession, addiction, numbness, dysfunction in relationships, patterns you can't seem to break, no matter how hard you try. The sexual shadow isn't just about lust. It includes every part of your sexual self that you were taught was wrong, dirty, shameful, or too much to be loved. It's the desire you pretended didn't exist, the fantasies you buried, the feelings you've never let yourself feel because they seemed too much. And here's the catch. Ignoring it doesn't make it disappear. It makes it grow in silence. And when it finally breaks the surface, it doesn't always show up as a conscious urge. It leaks into your behavior in strange, confusing ways. Maybe you lash out at people who make you feel vulnerable. Maybe you jump from one meaningless hookup to the next because real intimacy feels terrifying. Maybe you crave control or domination and don't know what to do with that. Or maybe you've gone numb, emotionally, physically, spiritually. If that's where you are, you might think something is broken inside you. But Carl Jung would say the opposite. You're not broken, you're divided. And the parts you've labeled as bad or sick or unacceptable are the very parts that are still trying to find a way back to you. Carl Jung understood something modern culture often ignores. The parts of us we exile don't disappear, they transform. And often, they become dangerous, not because they're inherently bad, but because they've been buried so long they've twisted into something we don't recognize. This is the cost of repression. When sexual energy is denied or labeled as taboo, it doesn't get purified. It gets distorted. Shame turns into compulsion. Denial turns into projection. The result? You start acting out what you've never made peace with. And that's what makes the sexual shadow so powerful. It's not just about desire. It's about identity. It's the deepest, most honest expression of your longing. And if you won't give it space, it finds its way out. Through your dreams, your relationships, your inner chaos. It speaks in code, through dreams that shake you awake, through fantasies that don't make sense, through self-sabotage and unexplained guilt. This part of you is ancient. It predates your adult relationships. It goes back to the earliest moments you felt desire and were met with punishment, confusion, or silence. Maybe someone told you it was bad. Maybe they didn't have to. Maybe they just looked at you a certain way. That was enough. So you did what your psyche is built to do. You split. You buried what felt unsafe. You protected yourself. And that's not a flaw. That's a survival strategy. It's what Carl Jung called the formation of the shadow. And in the case of sexuality, that split usually happens young, long before you ever had the tools to make sense of it. Carl Jung warned, what you don't make conscious comes back as fate. And that's what this is. A warning. Not of punishment, but of consequences. If you don't meet your shadow on your terms, it will meet you on its own. And it won't ask for permission. It will show up as repeated patterns, as emotional deadness, as attraction you can't explain and repulsion you can't control. You'll feel drawn to people who awaken something deep in you, and then hate them for it. You'll judge the very behaviors you secretly long to express. You'll chase what hurts and reject what heals. Why? Because the unconscious doesn't operate by logic. It speaks in symbols. It plays through fantasy. It whispers through discomfort. And it will not stop until you listen. Carl Jung once said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. That includes your sexual reactions. So when someone makes you feel unsettled, ask yourself, what are they showing me about a part of myself I've shut down? Is it their freedom, their vulnerability, their intensity, their ability to want without apology? Whatever it is, it's yours too. It's not just them, it's you. It's a reflection of what still lives in your shadow, waiting to come home. And this is where things get painful. Because repression doesn't lead to virtue, it leads to fragmentation. You become two people. One public, polished, in control. The other, chaotic, impulsive, hidden even from yourself. One version smiles at dinner parties. The other shows up in fantasies you don't talk about, in relationships you can't explain, in moments that leave you ashamed or confused. This isn't hypocrisy. It's the inevitable outcome of a divided self. The more disconnected you are from your shadow, the more control it has over you. And the more you suppress, the louder it gets. Carl Jung described this process as a passage, a narrow door no one escapes. But he also said, on the other side of that door is wholeness. Not perfection, wholeness. Because the sexual shadow doesn't just contain wounds, it contains power, vitality, joy, connection, creativity, presence. It's not proof that you're sick. It's proof that you're alive. Your exhaustion? It might not be physical. It might be the weight of hiding your full self. You're not just tired. You're tired of performing, tired of pretending, tired of shaping your life around who you're supposed to be instead of who you are. And this is where Carl Jung's work becomes revolutionary. He didn't offer escape. He offered confrontation. He believed that transformation starts the moment you're willing to sit with what you've buried. To feel, not act, not suppress. Just feel the desire you were taught to fear. That's how integration begins. Not with indulgence, not with shame, but with awareness. So what happens when you finally stop running? When you stop labeling your desires as problems to fix and start asking, where did this come from? Who told me it was wrong? What would happen if I stopped judging this part of myself and started listening to it? That's where the shift begins. That's where integration starts. Not by acting on every urge, not by shutting them all down either, but by entering a relationship with the shadow. Carl Jung believed the goal was never to obey the shadow, but to understand it, to be curious, to create space for dialogue between who you are and the parts of you you've hidden away. Because once you invite your shadow to speak, everything starts to change. You stop being afraid of yourself. You stop apologizing for being human. You stop performing perfection. And instead, you begin something terrifying and beautiful. You start becoming whole. This isn't about sexual indulgence or spiritual repression. It's about presence. It's about finally understanding what your desires are pointing toward, not just physically, but emotionally, psychologically, even spiritually. Because beneath every buried fantasy is a real need, a real longing, a part of you that was never allowed to live. Maybe it was your need to surrender, or to feel powerful, or to be wanted without shame. Maybe it was the softest part of you that got shut down too early, or the wildest part that never had space to breathe. And when those parts are exiled, they don't die, they just go underground. But even in the dark, they grow. And sooner or later they come back, not to punish you, but to be known. Carl Jung famously said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." And there's no darkness more avoided or more revealing than the sexual shadow. So ask yourself, what part of your desire have you buried? And what does it cost you to keep it hidden? Because something has been lost. You can feel it. There's a part of your life that feels muted, flat. You're going through the motions. You're checking the boxes. You're showing up, but not fully. You might smile during intimacy, but something in you stays distant. You might be physically there, but emotionally vacant. That's not dysfunction. That's disconnection. That's your shadow knocking. And here's the deeper truth. The reason you were taught to repress your sexual shadow isn't just about culture or family. It's built into the architecture of the human mind. Carl Jung believed the psyche doesn't grow as a unified, clean system. It grows in fragments. It splits to survive. When you were young, anything that felt unsafe or unacceptable got pushed into the unconscious. Not because you were broken, but because your mind was protecting you. It had to choose what was safe to show the world, and what had to stay hidden. So it built a wall, and everything on the other side of that wall, that became your shadow. Now, when it comes to sexuality, this split is often sudden and violent, because desire shows up early in life, before you know what to do with it, before you have language to explain it. And if that early energy is met with shame or silence or punishment, it gets cut off. You learn that wanting is bad. Your body is dangerous. Expressing your instinct is a problem. And from that moment on, desire becomes something to hide, not something to explore. But again, hidden doesn't mean gone. It means distorted. Because the unconscious never forgets. It doesn't use words. It doesn't follow logic. It speaks through sensation, through emotion, through reaction, through dreams, through the parts of you that don't make sense but won't go away. That's why you might become obsessed with people who awaken what you've repressed. You'll project your own disowned energy onto them. You'll try to possess it, control it, save it, judge it, or run from it. But deep down, you're not reacting to them. You're reacting to the part of yourself they remind you of. This is the trap of projection. We chase others to reclaim what we lost in ourselves. And the cycle continues. The more we suppress, the more we project. The more we judge, the more we suffer. Until one day, you wake up with a beautiful life that doesn't feel like yours. Surrounded by people, but feeling empty. In relationships, but disconnected. Physically close, but emotionally cold. And that emptiness, that's not failure, that's the cost of fragmentation. Carl Jung warned us. Repression doesn't make you virtuous. It makes you numb. And numbness kills not only desire, it kills aliveness. That's why the sexual shadow isn't just about intimacy. It touches everything. Your creativity, your presence, your voice, your spiritual connection, your energy. It's all linked. Because sexual energy isn't just biological. It's symbolic, archetypal. It's the life force within you, your anima, your instinct, your passion. And when you repress that life force, your entire being slows down. You procrastinate. You overthink. You feel drained. You fantasize more than you act. You retreat instead of expressing. And all of it feels mature. It feels normal. But it's not. It's resistance. It's fear. It's grief. This is what Carl Jung saw over and over again in his patients. What looked like depression, or anxiety, or burnout, was often just disintegration. The slow collapse of someone who hadn't allowed themselves to feel. Someone who had become a stranger to their own body. Someone who had performed their way into a life that no longer felt alive. Because society encourages this kind of splitting. We live in a world that uses sexuality to sell you things, but punishes you for actually feeling it. You're supposed to be attractive, but not too expressive. Sexy, but not too emotional. Interested, but not vulnerable. And so we grow up performing a version of desire that has nothing to do with truth. We touch each other without really feeling. We speak without saying anything real. We confuse stimulation with intimacy, and we wonder why it all feels hollow. The truth is, a disconnected shadow is profitable. It's easier to control someone who is confused, ashamed, or numb. And so the system feeds the disconnect, but you don't have to stay stuck in it. Because Carl Jung's message wasn't one of despair, it was one of transformation. He believed that facing your shadow, especially your sexual shadow, is the key to reclaiming your power. When you finally turn toward it, really sit with it, listen to it, and understand it, you begin to move differently. You stop chasing empty validation. You stop settling for surface-level connections. You stop shrinking yourself to make others comfortable. You begin to embody who you are, instead of performing who you think you should be. But that process, it's not easy. You'll grieve. You'll rage. You'll remember moments you've tried to forget. You'll feel the ache of desires never expressed, of years spent hiding. You'll admit the truth. You've been living a life that's only half yours. But Carl Jung would tell you, that's not weakness. That's the first step toward wholeness. There's a moment in everyone's life, maybe several, where something shifts, not outside but inside. You start to realize, The version of yourself you've been performing doesn't feel alive anymore. You've been saying the right things, showing up the right way, doing what's expected, but it all feels hollow. That's not just burnout. It's not just maturity. Carl Jung would say that's disintegration. You've split too far from your inner truth. And now, even the most beautiful parts of your life feel distant, because you feel distant from yourself. This is what happens when the sexual shadow is ignored for too long. You don't just lose intimacy, you lose presence. And when presence dies, love becomes maintenance. Conversations become routine. Sex becomes a performance. Your life, instead of being felt, is simply managed. This isn't just about relationships. The damage goes deeper. When the sexual shadow is suppressed, it bleeds into your creativity, your self-worth, and your sense of purpose. You stop taking risks. You overthink everything. You wait for permission to feel alive again, but it doesn't come, because you've trained yourself to reject the one part of you that could wake you up. See, sexual energy isn't just for pleasure. It's not just physical. It's symbolic. It's spiritual. It's archetypal. It's the purest, most concentrated form of life force energy you have. Carl Jung understood this long before it became a buzzword. When that energy is blocked, your soul starts to slow down. You hesitate. You distract. You numb. You scroll. You fantasize instead of acting. You dream of freedom while reinforcing your cage. And it all feels reasonable. But it's not reasonable. It's resistance. It's your psyche defending itself from the pain of unmet needs. And here's the twist. On the surface, you may look successful. You may have the job, the partner, the life checklist all ticked off. But underneath it all, you don't recognize your voice anymore. You catch yourself smiling, but it doesn't reach your eyes. You speak, but it's like hearing someone else. You feel like a guest in your own life. That's not normal. That's not the price of adulthood. That's the cost of suppression. You didn't just bury your sexuality. You buried your soul. And the world? It rewards this disconnection. We live in a culture that's hypersexualized, yet emotionally barren. We advertise sex, but we don't allow space for real connection. We celebrate desire when it sells, but we shame it when it becomes vulnerable. We're told to be sexy but modest, free but in control, expressive but not too much. So we end up confused. We want to connect, but we don't know how. We chase pleasure, but feel empty afterward. We desire intensely, but touch like we're scared of each other. Because we are. We're scared of what might surface if we felt everything. The truth is, society doesn't want your wholeness. It wants your confusion. The more disconnected you are from your inner world, the easier you are to manipulate, to market to control. If you don't know what truly moves you, then someone else can decide that for you. So the sexual shadow becomes not just a psychological issue, it becomes a political one, a cultural one, a spiritual one. You are not meant to live halfway awake. But it's profitable if you do. This is why Carl Jung didn't just treat the shadow as a personal problem. He treated it as a sacred task, a rite of passage. He believed that reclaiming the sexual shadow isn't just about healing your past. It's about taking back your agency. It's about finally knowing what moves you so deeply that no one else can use it against you. You don't just get more pleasure. You get more power. And not the kind that controls others. The kind that anchors you, that grounds you, that keeps you from begging for scraps of love or shrinking your truth for approval. You stop needing to perform. You start living as presence. But there's no shortcut. You have to go through the fire. You have to face the grief, the regret, the longing, the ache of years spent pretending. You have to look directly at the part of you that you were told was dangerous and offer it a seat at the table. That's not regression. That's the first act of becoming whole. And here's the paradox. What the world calls darkness, Carl Jung called potential. Your desire isn't evil. Your fantasies aren't shameful. The things that move you deeply, even if they confuse you, even if they scare you, they're not signs that something's wrong. They're signs that something inside you is still alive. And maybe that's the most terrifying part of all. Because once you turn toward your shadow, your real life begins. Not the one you built out of fear. Not the one you curated for safety, but the one that was waiting underneath all along. This is the uncomfortable truth. Your sexual shadow doesn't need to be fixed. It needs to be faced. It needs to be seen, understood, integrated. Not so you can become pure, but so you can become whole. Because the only thing more dangerous than your desire is your refusal to meet it. And that's what so many of us have been doing, avoiding the parts of ourselves that feel too wild, too much, too complicated. But those parts are still here. They've been following you, not to harm you, not to control you, but to come home. That's what the sexual shadow wants. To be seen, to be held, to be part of you again, not as something to indulge, not as something to fear, but as something to integrate. You've spent years keeping this part of you hidden. Maybe it wasn't intentional. Maybe it was survival. Maybe you were just doing what you were taught. Be good, be clean, be safe. Keep your desires in check. Don't show too much. Don't need too much. Don't feel too much. So you pushed it down. And you told yourself that was a strength. But it wasn't strength. It was silence. And the part of you that got silenced? It didn't go anywhere. It's been waiting, not to punish you, but to come back into your life. Because your sexual shadow isn't evil. It's not shameful. It's not toxic. It's an unintegrated life. It's power you've never claimed, truth you've never told, emotion you've never let fully rise. And it's still yours. Carl Jung taught that every part of the psyche has a purpose, even the parts that make you uncomfortable, especially those parts. Because what you've buried isn't just desire. It's vulnerability, it's softness, it's intensity, it's sensitivity. You can feel joy and connection without guilt. And when those parts are repressed, they don't vanish, they wither. Until one day, you wake up in a life that looks fine on the surface, but feels lifeless underneath. You don't feel inspired. You don't feel touched. You don't feel alive. You might even forget what it used to feel like. To be lit up, turned on by life, by art, by someone's presence, by your own. This is the hidden consequence of ignoring your sexual shadow. You don't just lose passion, you lose presence. And when presence dies, so does intimacy. Because love, real love, can only exist where you are fully present. And if part of you is hiding, if part of you is exiled, you'll never be fully with anyone, no matter how physically close you are. That's why relationships start to feel hollow. Your partner may not know what's wrong. They might even blame themselves. But deep down, they're feeling the absence of you. Not because you're distant, but because you've never brought your whole self into the room. You smile, you touch, you talk, but behind it all, something in you is shut down, and that shutdown spreads. It's not loud, it's not violent, it's just vacant. And a vacancy, over time, ruins love. But here's the terrifying part. People adapt to it. They normalize the numbness. They call it stability. They call it maturity. They convince themselves that the fire they once felt was just youth, just hormones, just drama. But deep down, they know. They know they buried something real. And no matter how successful they become, no matter how tidy their lives appear, there's a quiet ache that never leaves. That ache is the shadow, still whispering, still waiting. Carl Jung understood this in a way few psychologists ever have. He didn't just see sexual repression as a behavioral issue. He saw it as a soul issue, a psychic fracture, a division in the self that doesn't just affect the bedroom, it affects the entire life. Because sexuality isn't just about pleasure. It's symbolic, it's creative. It's the anima, your inner fire, your intuitive instinct, your unfiltered expression. When you block that flow, everything in you slows down. Your work suffers, your art dries up, your voice feels fake. You stop expecting magic. You stop hoping for wonder. You become reasonable, efficient, appropriate, but not alive. This is the kind of disconnection Carl Jung warned about, a fragmentation of the soul so subtle, so common, that most people don't even realize it's happening until it's too late. They call it stress, burnout, a rough patch, but it's not any of those things. It's a life built around avoidance, and society reinforces that avoidance, constantly, through the media, through religion, through shallow self-help advice that tells you to rise above your desires instead of understanding them. We glamorize sex, but avoid its meaning. We obsess over appearance, but stay terrified of real intimacy. We chase stimulation, but never confront our emotional wounds. And so, generation after generation, we stay stuck, half awake, half alive. But there is another path, and it's not glamorous, it's not quick, it won't look pretty on Instagram, but it's real, and it begins the moment you stop running, the moment you stop moralizing your desire, the moment you stop calling your fantasies wrong, the moment you ask, what if this isn't a problem? What if it's a message? What if this part of me isn't here to hurt me but to help me come back to myself? That's where healing begins. This is what integration looks like. You stop chasing things to feel whole. You stop suppressing things to feel safe. You begin to show up, fully, honestly, even when it's uncomfortable. You feel your desires without shame. You express your needs without apology. You walk through the world not as a fractured self, but as a whole human being. And wholeness, Carl Jung said, is not perfection. It's the union of opposites. It's the reunion of the parts of you that were never meant to be separated in the first place. You are not wrong for wanting. You are not broken for feeling. You are not dirty for desiring. But you are at risk if you keep dividing yourself into what's acceptable and what's not. If you keep performing for the world instead of living from the soul. Because here's the thing about the shadow. It does not remain silent forever. If you won't open the door, it will break through the wall. If you won't meet it gently, it will come back as fate. And suddenly, you'll be wondering why you sabotage what you love. Why do you run from the people who make you feel alive? Why do you stay in numb relationships and flee from real ones? It won't make sense until you look back and realize you never integrated the one part of you that had the power to set you free. You think you're choosing who you love, who you desire, who you push away. But beneath all those choices is a blueprint, a map drawn in silence, shame, trauma, and absence. And unless you bring that map into the light, it will keep running your life. So now comes the question only you can answer. Will you keep hiding? Or will you turn around, finally, and face the part of you that's been following you all this time? Because that's your sexual shadow, not your enemy, not your weakness, but the piece of your soul that's been waiting to come home. Wholeness or performance, presence or numbness, a life from the surface or a life from the soul. The choice isn't easy, but it's yours.